Historians enlarged this 1895 photo and found what one boy was hiding behind his back. Dr. Marcus Reynolds had examined thousands of photographs from the post-Civil War era, but this image made him pause. It was July 2024, and he sat in the Southern Historical Collection Archives in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, cataloging estate donations. The photograph before him was labeled simply, "Two boys, circa 1895, location unknown." Two children, approximately 10 years old, stood on a plantation house porch. The white boy positioned himself slightly forward, face lit with an unself-conscious smile. He wore clean cotton pants, a pressed shirt with suspenders, hair neatly combed and parted. He gazed directly at the camera with the confidence of a child who had never known fear or hunger. Beside him stood a black boy, positioned half a step behind. His expression was entirely different. Solemn, almost vacant, eyes looking past the camera into some distant place. His clothes were simpler, a plain work shirt and patched trousers. His hands were clasped behind his back, in an oddly formal posture that seemed unnatural for a child. Marcus lifted his magnifying glass, examining the photograph closely. The quality was remarkable for 1895. Sharp focus, good contrast, likely taken by a professional photographer traveling through the rural South. The backdrop suggested Mississippi or Alabama, judging by the architecture and trees visible in soft focus. Magnolia and live oak, branches heavy with Spanish moss. The positioning troubled him. Something in the body language and how the black child held himself so rigidly spoke of something darker than childhood friendship. Marcus had studied enough photographs from this era to recognize the subtle signs of inequality, the physical distance, the difference in clothing quality, the hierarchy implied in their stance. He turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded pencil, someone had written, "Thomas and his companion, June 1895. Not Thomas and his friend. Not even a name for the second child. Just companion. Marcus felt his heartbeat quicken. He had learned to trust his instincts after 20 years of historical research. This photograph was hiding something. He reached for his laptop and carefully positioned the image on the scanner, adjusting the resolution to maximum. As the machine hummed, capturing every microscopic detail of the century-old print, Marcus sensed he was about to uncover something that would challenge everything people thought they knew about the post-abolition South. The scanner beeped. Marcus opened the digital file and began zooming in, section by section. Then he saw them, the fingers. Behind the black boy's back, barely visible in the original print, his small hands clutched something, a piece of paper folded and creased, held so tightly his knuckles appeared almost white, even in the sepia tone. Marcus leaned closer to his screen, pulse racing. What was this child hiding? And more importantly, why? Marcus spent 3 hours manipulating the digital image, adjusting contrast and brightness, sharpening edges, isolating the area behind the boy's back. Modern photo enhancement technology had revolutionized historical research, allowing scholars to extract details from old photographs that original viewers could never have seen. With each adjustment, the paper in the child's hands became clearer. It was definitely a document. Marcus could now make out printed text, though the words remained illegible. The paper appeared formal, not a personal letter or casual note, but something official. Legal, perhaps. The edges were clean and straight, suggesting recent handling and careful folding. "What are you hiding, little one?" Marcus whispered to the screen, studying the boy's face again. There was no defiance in those eyes, no hint of rebellion, only resignation. The expression of someone far too young to carry such weight. He saved his enhanced images and began pulling reference materials from the shelves. Post-abolition Southern states, 1890, 1900, child labor laws, apprenticeship systems, black codes. He knew the history well. The 13th Amendment had officially abolished slavery in 1865, but the decades that followed saw the South develop elaborate systems to maintain white supremacy and black subjugation through other means. Sharecropping trapped families in debt. Convict leasing turned minor offenses into years of forced labor. Vagrancy laws criminalized unemployment, disproportionately targeting black men. And then there were the apprenticeship laws. Marcus paused, pulling out a thick volume on post-war legal codes. The apprenticeship system. He had read about it before, but never deeply investigated it. After the Civil War, many Southern states passed laws allowing courts to apprentice black children to white guardians without parental consent. Orphans were the primary targets, but the definition of orphan was flexible. Children whose parents were deemed too poor, too itinerant, or simply too black could be forcibly apprenticed to white families who would provide care and education in exchange for labor. The system was slavery in everything but name, persisting well into the 20th century. Marcus looked back at the photograph. Thomas and his companion. Not his servant, not his worker. His companion. The language was deliberate, carefully chosen to obscure the true relationship. He grabbed his phone and called Dr. Patricia Okafor, a specialist in African American legal history at Duke University. She answered on the second ring. "Patricia, I need your expertise on apprenticeship contracts from the 1890s, specifically Mississippi or Alabama." "Marcus, it's 7 o'clock. Don't you have a home?" "I found something, a photograph. 2 boys, 1895, and one of them is holding what looks like a legal document behind his back." There was a pause. "Send me the image." Marcus emailed the enhanced photographs. He heard Patricia's sharp intake of breath. Oh God, Marcus, that child looks terrified. The estate donation came from the Whitmore family of Raleigh, specifically from descendants of Eleanor Whitmore, who had died at 93 in March 2024. Marcus arrived at the modest brick house on a tree-lined street 3 days after discovering the photograph. A middle-aged woman named Janet answered the door, gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Dr. Reynolds? Come in, please. I'm Janet, Eleanor's granddaughter. The house smelled of old books and lavender. Photographs covered every wall surface, family portraits spanning generations, wedding photos, children at various ages. Janet led Marcus to a small dining room where several boxes sat, contents partially sorted. I apologize for the mess. We're still going through everything. Grandmother was a collector, never threw anything away. When we found those old photographs in the attic, we thought a historical society might want them. She didn't have labels on most. Eyes. Marcus carefully removed the photograph from his portfolio case. Do you recognize these two boys? Janet studied the image, squinting. No, I don't think so. Is it important? It might be. The photograph is historically significant. I'm trying to identify the children and understand the context. Did your grandmother ever mention family history, particularly from the 1890s? Not really. She grew up in Jackson, Mississippi, moved to North Carolina when she married my grandfather in 1955. Her maiden name was Cartwright. Big family down there, plantation owners before the war. Janet said this matter-of-factly, without shame or pride, just stating a fact. Marcus felt his chest tighten. Cartwright from Jackson. Yes, the family had a large property outside the city. Cotton, I think. It's all gone now, sold off in pieces over the decades. Do you have any family documents, letters, diaries, business records from that time period? Janet hesitated. There are some boxes we haven't gone through yet. Grandmother kept everything in the attic. Legal papers, old ledgers. We were going to throw most of it away, but if you think it's important, it could be very important. Would you allow me to examine them? 30 minutes later, Marcus sat surrounded by cardboard boxes filled with 5 generations of detritus, property deeds, tax records, personal correspondence. And then, in a leather portfolio at the bottom of the third box, he found it. A ledger book from 1894-1897, bound in cracked brown leather with J. Cartwright, Private Accounts, stamped on the cover in faded gold letters. His hands trembled as he opened it. The pages were filled with meticulous handwriting, recording purchases and expenses, fabric, equipment, livestock, wages paid to workers. And then, on a page dated April 12th, 1895, he saw an entry that made his blood run cold. Apprenticeship bond secured, Negro boy, age 9, from Henderson County Orphan Court. Payment to court, $25. Legal fees, $8. Boy to serve until age 21 as companion and servant. Below this, a different ink. Named him Samuel. Thomas seems pleased. Dr. Patricia Okafor arrived in Chapel Hill the following Monday, her rental car packed with reference materials and scanning equipment. Marcus had arranged for them to use a private research room at the university, away from curious eyes. What they were uncovering wasn't just academically significant, it was potentially explosive. Patricia spread copies of the ledger entries across the table, alongside similar documents she had pulled from archives in Mississippi and Alabama. This is worse than I thought, Marcus. Much worse. She pulled out a thick folder. After the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, southern states panicked. They'd built their entire economy on free labor, and suddenly that was gone. So they got creative. The apprenticeship laws were particularly insidious because they targeted children, the most vulnerable, the least able to resist. Marcus leaned forward, studying the documents. Walk me through it, okay? So, officially, these laws were designed to care for orphaned children by placing them with families who would provide food, shelter, and education in exchange for work. Sounds reasonable, right? Except the definition of orphan was deliberately vague. A child could be declared an orphan if their parents were poor, if they were deemed vagrant, or if a white person simply claimed the parents were unfit. She pulled out a court record from Greene County, Mississippi, dated 1893. Look at this. The court finds that the Negro woman Della shows insufficient means to support her children and lacks proper moral character. Her 3 children, ages 6, 8, and 11, are hereby apprenticed to Mr. Robert Johnson until they reach majority age. So they just took her children? Legally seized them, yes. And here's the crucial part. The parents had almost no recourse. These were county courts, all white juries, white judges. Black parents couldn't testify against white people in many jurisdictions. Even if they could, they had no money for lawyers. The system was designed to be insurmountable. Patricia laid out another document. And once a child was apprenticed, the master, that's the actual legal term they used, had almost complete control. The child couldn't leave, couldn't refuse work, could be punished for disobedience. If they ran away, they could be arrested and returned, sometimes with additional time added to their servitude. Marcus felt sick. It was slavery? It was slavery with paperwork, Patricia corrected. That's what made it so effective. They could claim it was legal, that they were helping these children, providing them opportunities, but the conditions were brutal. She pulled out a report from a Northern Missionary Society that had investigated Southern apprenticeship practices in 1899. These children worked from dawn to dark, field work, domestic labor, whatever was needed. They received minimal food, often slept in outbuildings, were frequently beaten. The education promised in the contracts, most learned nothing beyond basic labor skills. And the worst part? The system had economic incentive built in. White families could essentially own a child's labor for 12, 15 years. It was profitable. Marcus thought about Samuel, 9 years old, taken from an orphan court and given to the Cartwright family. The ledger says they paid $25 for him. 3 weeks into the investigation, Marcus and Patricia had assembled a disturbing picture of the Cartwright family and their plantation outside Jackson, Mississippi. Property records showed that James Cartwright, Thomas's father, had owned 340 acres of prime cotton-growing land. After emancipation, he had initially tried sharecropping arrangements with former enslaved workers, but by the 1890s, he had shifted to a new labor model combining hired hands with apprenticed children. The courthouse in Henderson County, Mississippi, had been helpful once Marcus explained his research. A clerk named Dorothy, herself a descendant of freed slaves, had personal interest in uncovering this history. She spent lunch breaks pulling dusty record books from storage, photographing pages, and emailing them to Marcus. "Y'all ain't the first ones to ask about this," Dorothy told Marcus over the phone. "My grandmother used to talk about children who disappeared. Families would wake up and find their kids just gone, taken by the courts, given to white families. She said everybody knew, but nobody could do nothing about it." From Dorothy's documents, Marcus learned that Samuel's full name had been Samuel Brooks. He had been brought to the Henderson County Orphan Asylum in January 1895 after his mother died of pneumonia and his father couldn't be located, though the records didn't indicate anyone had tried very hard to find him. Within 3 months, 9-year-old Samuel had been apprenticed to James Cartwright. "The speed is telling," Patricia noted when Marcus shared this information. 3 months from orphan to apprenticed. They didn't waste time. Marcus had also located the photographer who had taken the image. His name was William Thornton, an itinerant portrait photographer who traveled through Mississippi in the 1890s. His business ledger, preserved by a historical society in Natchez, showed he had visited the Cartwright plantation on June 18, 1895, and had taken family portraits, 6 exposures. But the photograph of the 2 boys was different from typical family portraits of the era. It had been taken outdoors, informal, almost casual. Why? Marcus had a theory, but he needed more evidence. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Patricia had posted an inquiry on several genealogy forums, asking if anyone had information about the Cartwright family of Jackson, Mississippi. Most responses were dead ends, but one message stood out. It came from a woman named Denise Johnson in Chicago. "My great-great-grandfather was named Samuel Brooks," she wrote. "Family oral history says he was taken from his father as a child and forced to work for a white family in Mississippi. He escaped when he was 17 and made his way to Memphis, then eventually to Chicago during the Great Migration. He rarely spoke about his childhood, but my grandmother said he carried papers with him always, hidden in his Bible. She said those papers were proof of what had been done to him." Marcus immediately called the number Denise had provided. She answered on the first ring, her voice eager and slightly breathless. "Is this about the photograph? I saw it after I sent my message. Dr. Okafor forwarded it to me. That's my great-great-grandfather. I'm sure of it." Denise Johnson arrived at the university on a cool October morning, carrying a worn metal strongbox measuring roughly 12 inches by 8 inches. She was a tall woman in her 60s, with gray-streaked hair and her great-great-grandfather's same thoughtful eyes. Marcus recognized them immediately from the photograph. Samuel's eyes passed down through generations. They gathered in the conservation laboratory where Patricia had assembled a team, 2 archival specialists, a photographer, and a document preservation expert. Everyone wore white cotton gloves. The atmosphere was reverent, almost ceremonial. "This belonged to Samuel Brooks," Denise said, placing the box on the examination table. "He carried it from Mississippi to Tennessee to Illinois. Through every move, every hardship, he kept this with him. My grandmother said he told her once that as long as he had these papers, they couldn't say it never happened. They couldn't deny what they'd done." The locksmith Marcus had hired stepped forward with his tools. "The lock is old but well made. Give me a few minutes." They waited in tense silence. Marcus found himself holding his breath. What would they find? Would the documents have survived? Would they prove what he suspected? With a soft click, the lock released. The locksmith stepped back, and Denise reached forward, then paused. "Dr. Reynolds, would you—" Marcus carefully lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had yellowed with age, lay several items. He removed them one by one, placing each on the examination table. First, a small Bible, its leather cover cracked and worn, pages soft with countless readings. Second, a tin photograph case containing a faded image of a black woman, young, serious-faced, wearing a simple dress. "His mother," Denise whispered. Third, a folded piece of paper, the edges brown with age. Marcus's hands trembled as he carefully unfolded the document. The conservation specialist immediately photographed each step. The paper crackled softly, fragile after 129 years, but the ink remained legible. "Apprenticeship bond. The header read, in official printed text, State of Mississippi, Henderson County. Marcus read aloud, his voice steady despite the emotion churning in his chest. Know all men by these presents that Samuel Brooks, a Negro boy of about 9 years of age, an orphan, is hereby bound by order of the Orphans' Court of Henderson County to James Cartwright, planter of said county, to learn the trade and mystery of farm labor and domestic service, and to serve the said James Cartwright until he shall attain the age of 21 years. Below were 3 signatures, Judge Harrison Whitfield, James Cartwright, and a shaky, uncertain mark that read, Samuel Brooks, his mark. They made him sign, Patricia said softly. A 9-year-old child who had just lost his mother alone and terrified, and they made him mark the paper that would steal the next 12 years of his life. But Marcus was looking at something else. In the margin of the document, in different ink, someone had written in small, careful letters, Mama died February 6th. Papa lives in Memphis. Nobody looked for him. The discovery of Samuel's apprenticeship bond opened floodgates of historical inquiry. Marcus and Patricia published their initial findings in the Journal of Southern History, but they knew academic papers wouldn't be enough. The story needed to reach beyond university libraries and scholarly conferences. It needed to reach the public. They spent the next 3 months working with documentary filmmaker Jerome Washington, himself a descendant of freedmen, to create a comprehensive investigation into the post-abolition apprenticeship system. The photograph of Thomas and Samuel became the emotional centerpiece, the visual proof that slavery had continued under a different name. But Marcus knew they needed more than one story. They needed to show the scale of the system, its deliberate design, and its devastating impact on generations of black families. Working with Patricia's network of genealogists and historians across the South, they began identifying other cases. The Henderson County records alone revealed 127 black children apprenticed between 1890 and 1905. Not one white child appeared in those records during the same period. Similar patterns emerged in county after county across Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and South Carolina. In DeSoto County, Mississippi, they found the case of the Anderson children, 4 siblings aged 5 to 12, apprenticed to different white families after their father was arrested on vagrancy charges, and their mother was deemed incapable. The families were separated, scattered across the county, never reunited. Census records showed them still listed as apprentice in 1900, 1910, even 1920, decades past the age when their bonds should have expired. In Lowndes County, Alabama, court records documented a mother named Hannah who appeared before the judge 17 times between 1893 and 1897, begging for the return of her 3 daughters. Each time she was denied, told the children were better off with their white guardians. The last record showed her arrested for disturbing the peace and sentenced to 6 months on a convict labor chain gang. This wasn't random, Patricia explained during one of their research sessions. This was systematic racial violence disguised as child welfare. Look at the language in these court orders. Proper Christian upbringing, industrial training, protection from idleness. They framed stealing children as charity. Stop. Marcus had also found something that made the horror even more explicit. In James Cartwright's personal correspondence, preserved in the same boxes Eleanor Whitmore had kept in her attic, he discovered letters between Cartwright and other plantation owners discussing the apprenticeship system openly. One letter, dated November 1894, was particularly revealing. My dear Whitfield, the new labor arrangement you suggested has proven most satisfactory. The Negro boy secured through the county court costs less than a hired hand and works harder, knowing he cannot leave. Thomas finds him a useful companion, and I find him useful in all manner of tasks. I recommend you pursue similar arrangements. The courts are most accommodating to men of our standing. Listen to this, Marcus said, reading the letter to Patricia. He's not hiding what he's doing. He's proud of it. He genuinely believed he was performing a service while simultaneously acknowledging the economic benefit. As the documentary neared completion, Marcus received an unexpected phone call. It was Janet Whitmore, Eleanor's granddaughter, the woman who had donated the photographs and documents that had started this entire investigation. Dr. Reynolds, I saw the preliminary articles about your research. I need to talk to you, in person, if possible. Her voice sounded strained, unsteady. Marcus agreed to meet her at a coffee shop near the university the next morning. When he arrived, Janet was already there, sitting at a corner table with a thick folder in front of her. She looked like she hadn't slept. I've been going through the rest of my grandmother's things, she began without preamble. After you found those ledgers, I started really looking at what we had kept, not just glancing through, but really reading, and I found more. She pushed the folder across the table. Inside were letters, dozens of them written by Eleanor Cartwright, Janet's grandmother, to her parents during her childhood in Mississippi. My grandmother was Thomas's sister, Janet said quietly. She was 6 years old when Samuel was brought to the plantation, and she wrote about him. A lot. Marcus carefully opened the folder. The first letter was dated June 1895, written in a child's careful handwriting. Dear Mama and Papa, we had our photograph made today. Thomas posed with his new companion, the colored boy Papa got for him. Thomas seems very pleased. The boy does not smile much. I wanted to be in the photograph too, but Papa said no. Your loving daughter, Eleanor. Marcus felt his chest tighten. This was written days after the photograph was taken, the photograph where Samuel stood holding his apprenticeship bond behind his back. Janet's voice was barely above a whisper. There's more. Keep reading. Letter after letter documented Samuel's life on the plantation through a child's observations. Sometimes Eleanor was matter-of-fact. The colored boy Samuel helped Mom in the kitchen today. Sometimes she was curious. Samuel told me he had a mama who died. I asked why he doesn't go to school with Thomas and me. Papa said colored boys don't need schooling. And sometimes, heartbreakingly, she noticed things that troubled her. Samuel was crying in the barn this afternoon. I asked why, and he said he missed his papa. One letter from 1897, when Eleanor was 8, read, Samuel tried to run away last night. Papa's men found him on the road to Memphis. Papa was very angry. He said Samuel would be whipped for disobedience and his service time would be extended. I asked Thomas if Samuel was like the slaves Grandmama used to have before the war. Thomas said Papa explained that Samuel is not a slave, he is an apprentice, and Papa is teaching him to work properly. But Thomas doesn't have to learn to work properly, and he is the same age. I don't understand the difference. She knew, Marcus said. Even as a child, she knew something was wrong. Janet nodded, tears in her eyes. The last letter about Samuel is from 1903. She writes that he disappeared in the night, that Papa was furious. The documentary premiered on a cold evening in January 2025, broadcast simultaneously on PBS and streaming platform. Marcus and Patricia watched from the university auditorium, where they had organized a public screening, followed by a panel discussion. The room was packed. Historians, students, community members, journalists, and descendants of both enslaved people and enslavers. Denise Johnson sat in the front row, surrounded by her extended family. Janet Whitmore sat 3 rows behind her, alone, her face composed but her hands clasped tightly. The screen went dark, then filled with the photograph. Thomas smiling, young and innocent in his ignorance. Samuel standing beside him, face solemn, hands hidden behind his back. The camera slowly zoomed in, just as Marcus had done months before, revealing the paper clutched in Samuel's small hands. The narrator's voice, deep and measured, began, This is a photograph of 2 boys taken in Mississippi in 1895, 30 years after the abolition of slavery. One boy is free, the other is not. And the document hidden behind the second boy's back would remain secret for 130 years, until historians discovered what he had been trying to preserve, evidence of a crime that America had forgotten. For the next 90 minutes, the documentary laid out the evidence with devastating clarity. Samuel's apprenticeship bond displayed in full, the ledger entries showing he had been purchased like livestock, his handwritten chronicle documenting years of forced labor, Eleanor's childhood letters witnessing what was done, the broader investigation showing thousands of children trapped in the same system across the South. Historians and legal experts provided context, explaining how Southern states had used legal loopholes to maintain white supremacy and black exploitation. Genealogists traced family trees torn apart by the apprenticeship system, showing descendants who never knew their ancestors had been forcibly separated. And throughout, Samuel's story remained the emotional center. A 9-year-old boy who understood even then that documentation was power, that evidence mattered, that his testimony might someday matter. The documentary's climax focused on Samuel's escape in 1903 and his journey to Memphis, then north to Chicago during the Great Migration. Using census records, city directories, and church registries, the research team had traced his adult life. He had found work in a meatpacking plant. He had married a woman named Ruth in 1908. They had 4 children. He had joined a church, worked as a deacon, participated in early civil rights organizing in Chicago's black community. The narrator continued. Samuel Brooks lived until 1963, dying at the age of 77, just months before the March on Washington. He never forgot what had been done to him. His daughter recalled that he kept his apprenticeship papers with him always, locked in a metal box that he never opened but never discarded. He told her once, "These papers are proof that they lied when they said slavery ended." The screen showed Denise Johnson holding the strongbox, then opening it in the conservation lab. The camera focused on Samuel's handwritten words. In the auditorium, people wept openly. In the weeks following the documentary's premiere, the story of Samuel Brooks and the apprenticeship system spread far beyond what Marcus and Patricia had imagined. Major newspapers ran features. The photograph appeared on the front page of the New York Times with the headline, "The Boy Who Preserved Proof, How One Photograph Exposed Post-Slavery Child Bondage." Academic journals published special issues examining the apprenticeship system across multiple states. And most significantly, descendants of apprenticed children began coming forward with their own family stories and preserved evidence. The National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., requested to display Samuel's apprenticeship bond, his handwritten chronicle, and the photograph as part of a new permanent exhibition on the continuation of slavery after abolition. Denise Johnson agreed on the condition that Samuel be identified by name and that his full story be told. At the installation ceremony in March 2025, Denise stood before the display case containing her great-great-grandfather's papers. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her, 4 generations of freedom that Samuel had fought to make possible. He was 9 years old, Denise said in her speech. 9 years old, and he understood that evidence matters, that documentation matters, that someday someone might care enough to look. He carried that understanding through 8 years of forced labor, through his escape, through 60 years of freedom haunted by what had been done to him. And he was right. People do care. The truth does matter. Justice may be delayed, but it is not dead. Marcus and Patricia had continued their research, expanding beyond Mississippi to document the apprenticeship system throughout the South. Working with a network of genealogists, historians, and community archivists, they had identified more than 3,000 cases of black children apprenticed to white families between 1865 and 1920, and they knew this was only a fraction of the true number. Each case told a similar story. A child taken from their family through legal manipulation, bound to a white household for years of unpaid labor, denied education and freedom, sometimes abused, sometimes disappeared completely from historical records. The system had operated openly, legally, with the full support of courts, law enforcement, and white society. But the research also revealed resistance. They found evidence of parents who fought in court for years to regain their children. They found accounts of children who escaped, like Samuel, and made their way north. They found black community organizations that worked to protect children and challenge the apprenticeship laws. And they found, again and again, preserved evidence, hidden documents, secret diaries, oral histories passed down through generations, showing that the victims of this system had never accepted the lies told about them. The documentary had sparked broader conversations about how American history is taught. School districts began incorporating the apprenticeship system into their curricula. Teachers used Samuel's story to help students understand that slavery's end was not sudden or complete, that the work of achieving freedom was long and ongoing. A year after the documentary aired, Marcus and Patricia published a comprehensive book, Hidden Bondage: The Apprenticeship System and the Continuation of Slavery in Post-Abolition America. It became a bestseller and won the Pulitzer Prize for History. Samuel Brooks had made a bet on the future, that someday truth would matter more than comfortable lies. That someday had finally come.